welcome. We are super excited to kick off part 2 of our NIRN virtual session today. We are recording the session just so you are aware, and we have an exciting agenda for us to participate in today. We learned so much from you in the last session, and we are just super excited to share those thoughts and kind of dive in. All the resources will be put into the chat today. So keep an eye out on that, and hopefully you are able to also access the information that we shared earlier this week. We do have a Twitter feed going on, so if you love what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what you're sharing today, please feel free to use Twitter at #ImpPractice22. So our facilitators for today, I'll just introduce myself really quick and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. I am Rebecca Hornack. I am an implementation and communication specialist at NIRN, and I am super excited to be part of the conversation today. I will turn it over to Dr. Karen Ward.
Hi everybody, Karen Ward here, Director of NIRN, and very honored and pleased to be a colleague of all the NIRNians and our good friends and colleagues that I see on the call today. So thank you for being here. And with that, I'll turn it to Sophia.
Hello, I'm so excited to start this session with you today and to keep our sessions going. We've learned a lot from you guys. So I'm Sophia Farmer, the K-12 portfolio lead at NIRN and implementation specialist.
So what are our objectives today? We are going to do a quick review about our conversation around exploration and core competencies that we had for our first session. What were our learnings from you? What did we take away? Then we're going to take a deep dive into the 3 competency domains. The email that went out to you assigned your home group to a domain and the core competencies within. So Dr. Ward's going to take us through that. Then Sophia's going to jump into the base level of understanding around those installation activities. And then, of course, we have our collaboration challenge, and you were asked to kind of preview a case study. You're going to have time to get back into your home groups that you were part of in session 1, and you'll have some new membership as we have some new people who joined the conversation today, and have a chance to really discuss and take a look at that case study and how it applies to the core competency and the work that you're doing. Couple of logistics and reminders. We are actually going to have you self-select your homerooms today. So that homeroom document in your email is really important, and you need to know that number. You can change your name if you want to, but you don't have to. It just will help us organize you. Leave your video on as much as possible to make it meaningful. I know it's hard with this many participants, but we really do love to engage and see faces. Be sure your Zoom is on mute unless you are speaking. We only have 1 breakout session today with your home groups. The majority of the time you'll be muted. And in those breakout rooms, you're going to have some great conversations. You're going to be using Padlet, so you might want to assign some people to some tasks when you get in there. And then, of course, please feel free to use reactions throughout chat. We have chat monitors. They'll be dropping links. They'll be engaging you. So feel free to throw comments into that chat box whenever you feel the need or want to. So what was the feedback we received from you and our first session? You guys loved the time with colleagues to discuss and network. You appreciated that time, and you really felt connected to the people in your group. We tried to keep them as small as possible. You enjoyed meeting with individuals who work within implementation. And what's fascinating about our group and our participants is they are from across the globe. They're across multiple sectors of implementation science. And we range from masters of the content to, hey, I'm new. So a really eclectic group having these conversations. You found that the initial information was helpful and really grounded your knowledge. Now, how could we have improved? And we took this to heart, and hopefully you'll see that in today's session. You wanted more information and knowledge on those core competencies. You felt you could have had a stronger conversation if you had some more learning throughout the session. A little less group time. We gave you quite a bit of group time in that first session. And so today we're gonna have some activities throughout, but you're only gonna get into your group that one time. A lot of information in a short amount of time. I wish I could fix that one for you. I really do wish I could fix that one for you. We love to get this information out. So hopefully we're able to solidify it down a little bit for you today. All right. So what were some of the lessons learned? We dove into your responses, your questions, responses from your collaborative challenge, and it was fascinating. I took a deep look at what were some of the common terms that you guys used to answer those questions. And then I created a bubble chart based on that. You'll see based on this graphic, you guys were heavily focused on, I need to know what the district wants or the agency wants. I need to know how to go into a situation. I need to evaluate their needs. They need to understand what their needs are. The community has needs that need to be met. You focus heavily on use of data throughout all of your responses, teaming structures, and involving stakeholders. The bubbles are getting smaller though when you look at the actual activities and behaviors we do as implementation specialists, right? So listening, facilitating, only 3 responses had the term listen in them. So that's kind of fascinating. Out of over 300 responses, 3 had the term listen. Coaching, relationships. So we're really heavily focused on implementation strategies and some of those behavior things that we do inherently or maybe not, and we want to focus on, are hard for us to articulate, which is why we're having these sessions. Feel free in the chat to drop your initial reactions when you see this graphic. Right. So as you're taking that graphic into consideration and what it means for you, I love that comment. Walking the walk is difficult to do. Theory is easier. It's easy to ground ourselves in those strategies, right? And to say, I know the frameworks and this is the approach I'm going to take. But when it comes to actually defining the work that we do and the behaviors that we take part in, it's really hard to articulate that. Thoughts from Karen or Sophia before we move on?
No, I think folks are spot on. I really appreciate the comment around walking the walk is difficult to do. Theory is easier. We try to do that at NIRN as well, but we often find ourselves, wait, hold up, we're not doing what we teach. And so we need to engage in that. So I really appreciate Scott, now it's gone up. I apologize if I said the wrong name there. And it does resonate with our feelings. I think we often make assumptions that those smaller bubble words are just naturally happening, and we all know what happens when we make assumptions. So how are we intentionally pulling those out? Because I agree, it's hard to understand the need without listening. Sophia?
I think you summed it up. I think it's great. It's exciting to see everyone's responses.
Yeah, listening requires more vulnerability as it relies on us. Need means I focus on you. Yes, I love that, Tanya, because to me, listening is often meaning you might need to look in the mirror, right? And as what I hear you saying there, and focusing on ourselves and what we're hearing, and listening to others. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Ward to set the stage for us for today.
Thanks, Rebecca. Appreciate that. So a piece of the feedback from you all was you wanted a little more information sharing and content around the competencies, the domains and the competencies within those 3 core domains to set you up for success within the different activities. So I'm going to spend some time just breaking down these domains and talking about these core competencies as we get going here before I turn it over to Sophia to talk about and introduce the installation stage. I'm also going to share with you as we do this what were some of the lessons we learned from you all and highlight what were some of the words that we heard you say during our time together. Again, trying to focus on what did we hear you say, the listening aspect of this work as well. So you can go ahead, Rebecca. Thank you. Okay, so we have 3 domains of our implementation support practitioner competencies. The first one being that domain of co-creation and engagement, right? This is really about how do we promote and facilitate the various critical perspectives, as we like to say, that are needed within implementation so that we're doing this work with them instead of to them. And that way we're ensuring that not only the practice or program that we're trying to support and use, but also the implementation strategies, methods, and tools we are using are contextualized, matched to the need, are a good fit with the values, or maybe we need to disrupt, that happens as well, right, in order to really change the system so that for implementation, okay? To engage in this domain of co-creation engagement, we identified with our partners, again, this work was led by Dr. Allison Metz, 5 key competencies for doing so. One is that ability of engaging in co-learning, right? And co-learning is really about engaging ourselves. Again, this is us listening, right? And deep understanding of the local context, hearing the different perspectives around the opportunity or the challenge that we're trying to address with the potential adoption or re-engagement in a practice or program that we're trying to use to address the opportunity that is in front of us, right? So co-learning is that we're learning that context, we're learning the players, and we're doing that with them. We're helping each other hear the different perspectives, which gets us into brokering, right? The brokering is that ability to connect people, build that bridge between the various critical perspectives and the different roles of actors that are engaged in implementation, so we can hear what each other are saying about the opportunity, the need, and what's worked and what hasn't worked. What are a question that I love to ask is, what are you most worried about? What are you most concerned? What keeps you up at night? So being able to help each other hear each other. And especially when we're looking at a multi-level system, how are we brokering, ensuring that we are connecting the various stakeholders or the critical perspectives at the different levels of the system that we're working in? The debate between top down, bottom up is over, right? There are disadvantages to each. How are we brokering and engaging all levels of a system at once within this implementation work and making those connections? Being that cultural broker as we go forward. We talk a lot about silos. Silos have a purpose to them, but to engage in implementation work, we also need to de-silo. So how are we brokering and making those connections and bridges, maybe between different departments or different sectors that we're working with in our implementation work? The core competency of addressing power differentials is so key, and we also have to acknowledge as implementation support practitioners our own power differential that we may be bringing to the table, especially if we're external to that organization that we're supporting the implementation in. Power differentials are very real. How are we ensuring that folks feel comfortable to have their voice, to be able to speak their voice and have their voice heard? Internal to NIRN a couple weeks ago, some of my colleagues, I kept getting used as the power example in the room, and I was like, wait, I don't have that power. What are you talking about? Yes, you do. So how do we acknowledge and own our own power? I see Yolanda and our team smiling at me. And how do we then use techniques, right, to address those power differentials? How do we use certain facilitation processes and make it a safe space? Do we create a Padlet or a Jamboard for folks to anonymously put their thoughts and comments down, just as a real concrete strategy as an example of how do we address that? How addressing power differentials sometimes mean giving anticipatory guidance to the executive leader or that individual with the most power to say, I need you not to be the first to speak. We need to listen and we need to hear what the staff are saying and not to respond right away to everything. Look for those different perspectives. How do we look for which voices we haven't heard? Another competency. The competency of co-design. We do this at all stages of the implementation, right? How are we purposely engaging those that we are supporting their implementation of and with, in the design, in the selection and the identification of implementation strategies that we're using, of tools, in the identification of the practices to be that we're wanting to support and select. How are we intentionally doing that? And hearing their perspectives. This requires system thinking, right? As we engage in this work. How do we help them solve the problems with us, with having their voices at the front end of the design process versus waiting and collecting it after we started implementation? Just was with a wonderful group of implementers from the School of Medicine here at UNC who's working on implementing mental health interventions to prevent further episodes of psychosis. An observation from one of the team members was, we don't start with the voices of the practitioners or the clients. We're really good about doing focus groups after we've started implementation. So when we're co-designing, how do we get their voices in from the beginning as we go forward? The last competency in co-creation engagement is really being able to tailor our support. And this makes me think of the phrase, just in time, just enough. We can't, as one size fits all program does not work for within different interventions. One size fits all in terms of our support, implementation support to agencies and teams doesn't work. We can't make the assumption that they need everything in and under the kitchen sink when it comes to implementation learning. How do we identify where are their expertise in the areas that they're bringing to the table? What can we strengthen? Where am I going to need to go deeper versus what I need to spend less time on? And how do we use their voices and their information to help us design and tailor that support and know when we need to ramp up in our support and activity from maybe intensive modeling or as we would say, co-teaching versus stepping back to being able to give some feedback in reviewing products, for example. So how are we tailoring our support and not making assumptions on exactly how much is needed and not using a one size fits all for helping them use different implementation strategies? So that is that domain of co-creation and engagement. And as you probably heard me speaking, it's really hard because of how interconnected these are not to go into other domains and other competencies, even just describing these. So Rebecca, let's look at our next domain. Oh, before we do that, let's honor and hear what we heard from you. Here are two examples. We had so many from our time together from the collaboration challenge, but I'm gonna give you a moment to read those two examples of this domain in action that we heard from you all as further illustrations. So we see within these, we see illustrations of co-creation engagement and those competencies of co-learning, co-designing as examples as we go forward. Rebecca, let's go ahead and let's look at that domain of ongoing improvement. So ongoing improvement, I always think of Senge, right? Of how do we ensure that the agency or the organization that we're supporting in implementation is valuing learning and learning from not only what works and is success, but from the screw ups and the failures, because sometimes we learn more in those cases than we do when we knock it out of the park right away, right? So how do we ensure that we are having that as an organizational value? And as an organizational learning as a value, how are we not only supporting the use of quantitative data, but also the importance of qualitative data and feedback along the way at each stage of implementation. And using that feedback and that information to identify where changes are needed or actions that we can take to improve the implementation strategies that we are supporting to be used. So several core competencies here. Well, there's many here. We look at how do we assess the needs as well as the assets for the different populations that we're working with, and help them to understand what are those assets that are being brought to the table that are able to be leveraged to address the need, or if we frame it in positive language, right, the opportunity that is available in front of us. As we do that, we also need the core competency of really deepening our knowledge and understanding of the context. This gets into the different players or the actors that are involved, the settings with which we're working in, the surrounding community, from the geographical to environmental to all the socio-political context, right? All those different pieces, so that we can have a greater understanding to facilitate our identification of what could be changes for improvement and use that data and information in our learning. Engaging in the competency of being able to apply and integrate implementation frameworks, strategies, and approaches, right? Again, this is very similar to how we tailor our support, but how do we use and engage in different frameworks, strategies, and approaches? We know there are over 30 different frameworks out there. There may be even more. That's a random number I picked from my head, knowing that Tabak reviewed 25 in 2012, or Myers and Wandersman and folks did that. I think Tabak and them had 49 frameworks that they reviewed at that time. So how do we choose which one? Which one would best fit for this context? Are there specific maybe I don't want frameworks and I want a multifaceted strategic approach, which is where we've seen the field go in more recent years with looking at menus of strategies. Or am I looking at needing a discrete strategy in this time and period? So how do we help and support to engage in that analysis of the strategies, the approaches, the frameworks that are needed, so that I'm best fitting the context that we're working in? So I'm using that information from assessing needs and assets and understanding the context to do so. Facilitation, right? How are we ensuring that we're engaging all the voices? We're providing those ample opportunities to do so. Communication. The importance of bi-directional communication, and this gets into brokering, right? How are we ensuring that we are having bi-directional communication? We're not just disseminating information, we're gathering information, we're using that information, engaging in multiple modes of communication. We know that people need things multiple times in different ways, often to hear what the information is that is needed. So how are we ensuring that multiple modes of communication are being used and there are truly bi-directional feedback loops being created, and there's mechanisms for lifting issues that we can't resolve that need to be lifted to another level of the system for support. And our favorite, conducting those improvement cycles or those plan, do, study, act cycles, which are often a complex intervention in themselves, where we're planning for the collection and the use of data for the different strategies or the change ideas that we're trying. We're monitoring that data, we're using that data to make adjustments, creating a new plan, and we're going again, right? The heart of this domain of ongoing improvement. So let's hear what we heard from you. So I'll give you a moment to read those two quotes on the slide there. Again, remember we were focused on exploration. So you're seeing that these quotes are really looking at that domain of ongoing improvement within the exploration stage. All right, Rebecca, we can go on. I want to make sure we have time. Okay, our last domain of sustaining change. This is that domain of where we're supporting the practice or program that and the implementation capacity development to be sustained, right? To be lasting, right? We want to put ourselves out of a job, as I like to say. We're here 10 years later, 5 years later, I always think to myself, I've done something wrong. Okay. So, how are we building that internal capacity to be able to sustain the continued use of the practice? And how are we ensuring that there's that shared vision and that mutual accountability as we do so? And we're facilitating the problem solving that is necessary throughout implementation, the resource sharing, and really leveraging existing relationships as well as existing resources. So when we look at the core competencies within sustaining change, we're looking at things which some may say is a soft skill, and we might make assumptions that we can naturally do this as support practitioners, but we have to strategically attend to this, and remind ourselves where we are in our relationship development process, and be mindful of, as we grow and sustain those relationships, are you going to have to make a withdrawal at some point by pushing in a certain way or giving some feedback or raising a critical concern? And by making with that withdrawal in the bank of your relationship, do you have enough in that bank of that relationship that you'll be able to sustain, right? So how are we growing those relationships? We know that teams are a critical structure to implementation that we need to be able to form and develop over time to hold the functions of implementation, ensuring that they are, Rebecca, you okay? Using data and using data to select the practices, to plan the necessary implementation supports, evaluate those how are those implementation strategies working, not working, make adjustments. So we're applying those improvement cycles, and we're going on our way towards full implementation of the sustainment and the scale of the practice. The last two, build capacity and cultivate leaders and champions. As I talked about, for building capacity, we really want to ensure that the agencies we're working with have deep knowledge and skills of not only the practice or program we're wanting them to support, but also the necessary implementation strategies and activities that are needed. So we think about general capacity, the innovation specific capacity. We often hear also talking about absorptive capacity. So as they learn new things, can they absorb that learning into their skill sets as they go forward? And then cultivating leaders and champions. There's been a lot published in the last 2 years around the roles of champions and leaders in the necessary activities that are needed within implementation. We may have an executive sponsor that is not a champion, that's not doing the visible promotion and displaying the attributes of a champion with deep conviction and belief that this is the right thing to be doing for their community. When our executive sponsors are not our champions, how do we engage other leaders that may not have that formal title but are our champions, so that we have both present within our implementation work? Both can be engaging in different sets of leadership activities. We need to be able to identify those individuals and grow them and support them within their leadership roles as we go forward. So, quick overview of those 3 domains. Let's look at what we heard from you when it comes to what words we heard from you around sustaining change in the exploration stage. So I'll give you that moment to read those 2 quotes. With that in mind, I've talked to you for a bit now, and we want to give you a few minutes to reflect on what you heard around those 3 domains and their core competencies. So what is connecting to you as an implementation support practitioner, or maybe you support implementation support practitioners just to up it another level? What are you connecting, or what is resonating with you And what wonderings or inquiries do you have about these 3 domains and these competencies? So there is a link to the Padlet. We'll also thank you, Jake. He's on it. He's linked it in the chat for you, or you can scan it with that QR code if you would like. And let's hear from you as to what wonderings you have, what resonated with you, or what is connecting.
So with that, we're going to move to installation, our second phase that we are working through as implementation support practitioners. So we're here at installation, one of the 4 phases of implementation. Last time we played around with exploration, right? How do we figure out what it is exactly that we need? How do we assess what we think we need is going to fit? How do we get buy-in? How do we gather people to have those great conversations around what it is we might need or what might fit? So as we take our teams from exploration and that, yeah, let's do it. Let's decide that we're going to move forward with this practice or program, we move into installation. Installation is where we've decided we're going to try it, right? We've decided we're going to make it happen. But before we launch, not as we're launching, which is a favorite practice I know, at least in education. I'm sure it happens in other fields where we try to build that plane as we fly it, right? Installation says, wait a minute, what if we try to build that infrastructure before we fly it? So how do we assure that we have resources? How do we assure that we have all the critical perspectives that we need at the table? How do we take time to engage, to co-create, as Karen mentioned, to broker for supports, to communicate, to build that robust data system, to build those systems of training and work together to leverage expertise? How do we support each other through systems of coaching? How do we build all of the resources and infrastructure to the best of our knowledge so that we can be successful in our implementation efforts? In other sessions, we'll talk together about how to take what we've built and move into that initial implementation phase where we're going to try it out. We're going to try it out and go into that continuous improvement mode that Karen mentioned and get better at the work we do. And then from there into full implementation where we can really scale and make sure that as many as possible are getting access to those high quality interventions and innovations that we're trying to implement. Now, we like to talk about this as if it's linear, right? It makes it easier for us to understand if it's a step 1, step 2, step 3. But what we know as implementation support practitioners, those of us that are doing it in the field, is that it's anything but linear, right? Which is why we have that infinity symbol kind of laid behind the graphic of our phases. It is anything but linear. In fact, we often find ourselves going back and forth. So much like Karen was saying, it's really hard to talk about one competency without talking about another because they're all intertwined. It's really hard to talk about one phase without also talking about another, right? Because as we're really looking at installation, we're planning for full implementation and anticipating potential barriers and anticipating things we might run into. When we're in installation, we often frequently say, oh no, we forgot, or oh no, let's go back and re-examine something from exploration that we might not have given ourselves the luxury or grace of time to really understand at the depth that we needed to. So what does that installation really look like? What are we hoping to get out of installation? What we're hoping to really get out of that installation process is that we have a strong team. You guys have been in teams, you've been in multiple teams, I'm sure, but we really want to take the time to make sure that our team is functioning well and that we know how to collaborate and we know how to make difficult decisions together. We want to make sure that those that are implementing the practice are well trained and are set up to be coached, right? So we've not just built the system of coaching, but we've prepared them for a culture of coaching. We've prepared them to understand that coaching is an area of support. It's a partnership activity. We've been very thoughtful about our data and installation, looking not just at outcome data, but how are we looking at process data, implementation data, fidelity data, and not just how are we going to collect it, but how are we going to use it? One of my colleagues in a state that I work with was just talking about this with me, where we were saying, yes, I'm very excited to build a data dashboard, but when we work with our team, we want to make sure that they understand from the outset why we're using this data, to what end, and what answers is it going to give us to our questions. We want to make sure that we take a look at policies and procedures. Is what we're building going to disrupt a policy or procedure that we might need it to? Right? Is it going to align with policies and procedures? How might that interplay be understood? And if we don't understand it from the outset, how might we build that system of a practice policy feedback loop to make sure we understand the interplay of those policies and procedures with our practices? Which takes us to that bi-directional communication Karen was talking about, right? How do we become expert communicators, but expert listeners as well? So that's what we hope to get out of installation. As you can imagine, right? We probably won't get it right all at once, but we're not going to wait until we get it perfect. We're going to then launch, right? And then we're going to get better as we go. But how do we get to those outcomes? How do we do that? We're going to do that by making sure that the practices and programs we have are really clearly defined. I know what it looks like. I know what it sounds like. I know what possible adaptations can be in use. I'm going to make sure that my team is functioning well as an outcome. So how do I do that? I'm going to continually revisit that team membership. I'm going to assess and make sure, right, those teams are functioning, not just because I think they are, but because the team members tell me, right? Have I heard their voice in understanding how their teams are functioning? Do we have a solid plan for moving forward? Are we all committed to following that plan as we move forward? Do the resources that we had sought to put in place, are they there? Is there something we need to keep tweaking, right? We're making sure we're selecting and training practitioners, and like we talked about, those continuous feedback loops and refining policies and procedures. So I've given you just a really quick look and reminder of what installation activities can be, along with our outcomes, what we hope to get out of installation as we move forward with implementation. Jake, once again, he's been on it. So he put the implementation stages planning tool right in the chat for you, which is what you saw on the screen. So we're going to take a minute. A lot of us have either favorite activities or ones where we spend a lot of time, right? So what key activities do you most frequently focus on during installation? You should see the Zoom poll have popped up.
I want to say I check them all, but then I'm like critically evaluating which ones am I prompting for and supporting.
I was hesitant to ask this question as broad as it was, but I was like, no, I want to know where we have a tendency to go during this stage.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because the one that I was thinking I probably did the least is showing up so far as common in the poll so far. We'll see how it ends up.
Sophia, you crack me up.
I'm like, yeah, I don't do that much either. All right, we're at 78%. as Karen says, let's see if we can get to our 80% mark. A few more answers.
Oh, we're sitting right at 78% with
Yeah.
90.
Oh, yeah, we did it. Score. All right. So look at that. Where we spend the most of our time is really developing that plan for implementation, that plan for moving forward, right? Which makes sense with our teams. We want to know what we're doing and where we're going. And like many of you, as it shows up, this revisiting team membership and selection criteria is where we spend a little less time, right? And I have a tendency to do that too. We get our team and we have our team, right? And so I often think, maybe I should spend a little more time establishing those critical perspectives and those voices, right, from the field, and making sure that we're not just getting their opinions, but having them sit at the table with us. So great. What else do you notice, Karen or Rebecca, from the feedback we've gotten?
Yeah, I'm wondering if people want to drop their noticings in the chat or if anyone wants to come off mute. But what really strikes me is refined policies and procedures is really low. And I wonder if that's because we do that more in initial implementation when we're like hard in it and learning and we've got more data flowing potentially maybe. I might be wrong in understanding the rationale I'm throwing out for that, but I'm wondering if that's what it is. I'm seeing what others thought, because that's the lowest, right, at 20%. It's kind of like we don't know what we don't know until we get into it, maybe. Peggy makes a really good point that they're super changeable, but they don't necessarily impact behavior. Amy draws a great conclusion of why we need a diverse time. Ellen, paper implementation, and we're all trained as support practitioners to stay away from paper implementation, the checklist manifesto. Excellent point. So my rationales are maybe totally off here. Scott says makes sense that there would be a usable innovation because we got to know what it is in order to implement it. Yeah, Meg agrees when thinking about that during initial implementation. Someone, Zandra, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name. Please correct me. That communication ranks so low at 29%. Do you think that's because we make assumptions that communication is happening?
Probably so. Probably so.
Yeah.
And you pronounced my name correctly. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thanks. My speech deficit comes up and bites me at times, especially with names.
I'm surprised that, as much as we often are data rich, but maybe this speaks to the statement data rich, but information poor, that we're have as low as we do. I mean, not that it's super low, but lower on conducting team meetings to use data for decision making. Right? Because it always feels like we're swimming in data, but maybe that does speak to our maybe not using it as well as we should. So some excellent points. I'd love hearing your feedback on this. So we are going to take just a couple of minutes. We've been on the computer and staring at the screen for a few minutes. So we're going to take a quick minute, maybe 5 minutes, I think is what we have on the agenda. Yep. To take a break. If you don't stand up and stretch or do a quick walk away from your computer, please at least either close your eyes or look off into the distance. I know all of our eyes are screen tired and weary. So we'll come back in 5 minutes.
All right, so what we wanted to do next is, before we get you into your home groups, we wanted to do what we do with you. We wanted to work through an example of the collaboration challenge with you as a whole group to kind of get you familiar with what we're hoping to do and achieve, and really illustrate what this can look like. So what we're going to do is we're going to work through a case study of the competencies in action within the installation stage. Now, as I present this case study and as we go through it, here are 3 things that I want you to be looking for or listening for as we work through this together, okay? I want you to think about what core competencies are visible to you. Specifically, think about that domain that you were assigned, right? You may think about the other domains as well, but what core competencies are jumping out at you, are visible? What do you notice about the interconnectedness between the competencies? What jumps out at you about that? What do you notice? And as you reflect on the case study, what other actions or that could have been taken from the competencies to support this team's work as we go forward? So the 3 things are that I want you to listen for as we go through is what core competencies stand out to you? What are the interconnectedness? What do you notice about the interconnectedness between the competencies? And what other actions do you think are needed or that maybe you would have taken if you were in this scenario as the implementation support practitioner? So let's dive into the sample case study. So here we have a case study. We titled it The Early Adopters. They're in the installation stage. And the group is an early intervention TA center, technical assistance center, that's charged with supporting different local communities, early childhood centers and programs on the implementation of a practice called family guided routines-based intervention. Okay? The implementation team is in the deep thicket of installation and is in the process of selecting their first implementers, right? The first group of practitioners that are going to be the early adopters to begin using family-guided routines-based intervention. Now, it's just a case illustration. You do not have all the context. Make things up if you would like to, right? It's not going to be perfect. So we can go to the next slide. All right. Here's the challenge that we're trying to address, or the opportunity that's in front of us, right? The implementation team is having a hard time selecting those early adopters. The executive sponsor, the leader with the power on the team, wants to personally invite specific people that they know will say yes, while others disagree and want to open up the opportunity to all practitioners. And there's some talking and some musing, be out of the team meetings about this, as well as some elephant in the room noise when they're at the table and having this conversation. Everyone knows what I mean by the elephant in the room, right? We're sensing there's something not being said, right? So as the implementation support practitioner, what are your next steps? I'm just going to give you a minute. Oh, wait, don't share the screen, right? I'm going to give you a moment. Just think for a moment. If you were this implementation specialist or this implementation support practitioner supporting this team, what would be your next steps? I'm so bad on wait time, but I'm trying, Rebecca. Maybe you want to jot them down. All right. Oh, Melanie's got a thought in the chat. Thank you for sharing. So revisiting selection, the competencies, how well defined the vision is. Melanie, did you cheat and look ahead? I'm teasing, totally teasing. You're spot on. Let's go ahead, Rebecca, and go to the next slide and see what we did in this case illustration. Are there clearly defined skills? You guys are on it, right? So as the implementation support practitioner at the next team meeting, they step back to say, what are the skills needed to be an early adopter? Some of you put in the chat exactly, of the family guided routines-based intervention. And then facilitates a dialogue with the team to reach agreement, right? Using the team's definition of consensus on the necessary skills to be an early adopter. They then work with the team to co-design, right? Generating together the questions that they would put on a survey to administer to the staff to allow for their perspectives to be taken into account. and supports the development of a process to administer the survey and create next steps once they have that survey data back. And there's specific work that happens with the executive sponsor to develop a communication message around why and the purpose and what's going to be done with the survey data that can be sent to the entire staff. And Kathy, I love, it's not on here, but I love how you said listen and understand why the executive leader wants to identify. Why do they feel that that is so important to do? Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So let's see what happens, right? So they co-design that survey, they administer the survey to the staff to collect information from those that are interested in being an early adopter, as well as what other information perspectives that they gathered. Based on that information, the team followed their process and used the selection criteria that they identified to identify those early adopters. So again, brief, short case illustration, case study, right, of installation around this challenge of identifying who our early adopters would be. So if we go to the next slide, spend a few moments with your thoughts, do some reflection journaling. Here are those 3 things I gave you to think about at the beginning, right? As you think about your domain that you were assigned, or if you want to, we are flexible. If you want to think about another domain, maybe you didn't get your favorite. What core competencies did you see visible? What did you notice about the interconnectedness? And we already have identifying in the chat other actions that could have been taken from the competencies to support the work. So we'll give you a minute to think, write, and then we'd love to hear some voices or for folks to drop those thoughts in the chat. And then we're going to get into our collaboration challenge for the rest of our time.
I never kissed a mouth that tastes like yours. Strawberries and something more. Ooh yeah, I want it all. Lipstick on my guitar. Fill up the engine, we can drive real far. Go dancing underneath the stars. Ooh yeah, I want it all. Got me feeling like I wanna be that guy. I wanna kiss your eyes. I wanna drink that smile. I wanna feel like
On it. They're great thought around broken skills. Kathy, great observation. Cultivating that culture of co-learning together. Meg, it's great to see you in the chat. I appreciate your comment about trying to get at that root cause of the why, trying to identify. Thanks, Kathleen, for sharing that cross-silo leadership article that we just read.
So
Yeah, Cassie, there is a power differential here. You're spot on. So, what facilitation skills and other strategies do we need to address that? Got some great ones coming in. Would love to see a few others. Kathy, oh, great. You're bringing us back to what did maybe they miss in exploration that needs to be gone back. John is saying the survey data may have uncovered some additional information about unknown assets. Amy sees the co-designing of the qualifications, the skills that are needed. Oh, Denise, going back to one of our favorite tools, the give-get, and the norms for the group in a non-threatening way to facilitate the mutual decision-making. Ellen identified sustaining change, starting with the executive sponsor and getting the perspectives from others. Vicky, building trust with the team so honest conversations about the challenges can take place. Mona saying it may require some additional co-learning to understand and remind teams of the overall goal. Melissa's reminding us the importance of addressing power differentials in the context of ongoing improvement, supporting the team to understand the why and how this work is different, ghost to host, as we like to say. We're seeing the interconnectedness by Amanda between co-creation engagement and sustaining change. Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, thank you. Feel free to keep those thoughts pouring in. I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, who's going to get us set up and ready for our collaboration challenge together and working through some more case illustrations.
All right. Well, thank you. And I so appreciate the chat, and I'm really glad we're recording it. You guys are giving some amazing examples and self-reflections today as we move through. So as always, we're trying to connect these core competencies and behaviors that we do as implementation support practitioners and tying it to the explicit stage outcomes and activities that Sophia shared. So you received some case studies in advance to review based on your home groups. So I'm going to give you the directions, and we are going to take our time getting you into your rooms and making sure everybody is logistically where they need to be to have the conversation and the resources that they need. So in the chat, I'm going to have Jake go ahead and put the collaborative challenge document. This is, if you were part of our first session, this is where everything is housed. You're going to get into your home groups here in a few minutes. And what we want you to do is, if you had an opportunity, hopefully you had a chance to read your case study in advance. If not, you might want to give your colleagues a few minutes to get caught up. They're about a page and a half, relatively quick scans, okay? Once you're in your group and everybody's ready to go to have the conversation, we're going to go back to those questions that Karen just asked you around the sample. What are core competencies from your domain that were visible to you? What did you notice about the interconnectedness as you went through? Did other core competencies pop up as you were having the conversation? What other actions should have been taken, or would you have taken, or did we miss something? So those are your 3 core questions in regards to how you're going to answer them. You're going to be putting them on a Padlet for us. Now, the breakout groups, your home groups, are designed in a way to be small. We are missing some people that registered today. So we might have to maneuver you around because we don't want you to be by yourself in a room. So just be patient with us as we do that. But you'll be responding to Padlets, and everybody who's focused on, for example, sustaining change will have access to the exact same Padlet. So you'll see lots of different groups entering information on these Padlets, okay? So we are about ready to get started on your breakout groups. Go ahead and throw any questions you might have in the chat before we open rooms and I explain how you're going to get to where you need to go. Okay, Sophia, if you want to go through our next steps with the crew.
All right, so we have some homework to do here at NIRN. We are committed to really co-learning with you and applying what we're hearing from the field to our work. And as is a value of ours, anything that we learn, we are committed to sharing out as far and wide as we can. So to that end, we are going to spend some time reviewing and processing your discussion points. We were already geeking out a bit over some of the comments in Padlet and really enjoying them. So we're going to review and process those. We also are going to analyze your feedback from today's session. So when we get to that point, please, please, please fill out the evaluation survey using the link. As you saw today, we take that feedback very seriously and make changes to the work that we do. We definitely are going to share key takeaways back with you on August 10th, just like we did today. And we're going to do a similar process for the next 2 sessions. Based on the work in all of these sessions together, we're going to develop a companion guide to the competencies. So we have the competencies profile document and a guide. We're also going to be working to really operationalize how we see those competencies in practice. Don't forget to check out the AI Hub if you haven't already, as we build out additional learning modules for the competencies as well. So some of your experiences also might be reflected in some of the scenarios and learnings there. And then, because we are committed to ongoing improvement, it's part of our everyday work and the things that we do, you will be invited to participate in some usability testing of that document. We're always looking for more folks to add to our usability testing work, so we can broaden that pool and get a greater span of perspectives in the work that we put out into the field. So we have homework to do, but you have homework to do too, your next steps, but yours is hopefully a little easier. So again, please complete the feedback survey. We really do use that information. Please, we hope you'll come back and join us on August 10th, where we'll be talking about initial implementation and how we're going to apply those competencies to getting started and starting small before we get bigger. And then you'll want to, in anticipation of that, review the initial implementation stage on our stages planning tool and continue to dive into those ISP core competencies, reach out with questions, come with your questions, come with examples or thoughts. We're really interested in hearing how you're applying these and finding examples of these in your work. So thank you very much for your participation. The session evaluation has been in the chat from some of our friends. And there are some additional links on the next slide that you have access to continue to keep learning. So we hope you have a great rest of your week and looking forward to seeing you in August, if not before then, some of you.